Is this on? We're on. Folks, we're going to start. It's always good to see it's the Essence crowd that is still standing up. Welcome to Shuffle. Welcome to everyone in the room. Also welcome to everyone that's joining us on live stream. And it's kind of extraordinary to be here in our 6th year of doing this, actually. But it is the first year that we've done this as a fringe event to the Festival of Marketing here in London, which is one of the reasons why we're in a very different venue to last year, for those of you that have been here before. So I'll be interested in your feedback as to how that goes for you. A few little bits of admin before we really get going. Those of you in the room, in the front of your moleskins, you will find a whole heap of information. Preferable to hold on to my notes. A whole heap of information that you need to do with Wi-Fi logins and our web app that has got all the information about the event on. So please do take a look at that. And the web app is at, just so you know, it's at shuffle.essencedigital.com. We're using the Twitter hashtag Shuffle2013. And for those of you for whom this is the first time at Shuffle, just a tiny little bit about the format, because it's maybe a little bit different to some events you go to. So the first thing to say is there is no theme to Shuffle, deliberately so. So the talks that our speakers are going to give are unconnected, other than they all have something to do with digital. And this year, we've gone for a slightly shorter format than previous years, partly based on your feedback from last year. So each session is a tight 30 minutes, but hopefully that pace will be something that's good. We're hoping to have some time for some Q&A at the end of each session. And for those of you on live stream, you can post questions with the Twitter hashtag that I mentioned earlier on. So before we get going, I just wanted to pause for a reflection briefly about what's been an extraordinary year at Essence. And I don't mean the end of my long-standing status as an ambassador for Vidal Sassoon, which has resulted in this fabulous bird nest on my head and the too early for November facial hair. I mean more, once again, almost doubling in size. So we're now about 350 people globally, getting our presence up and running on the West Coast in the US with offices in San Francisco and Seattle, adding to our mobile capability with some really world-class capabilities with the acquisition of Point Reach in Seattle, and opening in Singapore, which in just 6 months has got up to 13 people already. So I'm sure these are things that those of you that we know well kind of vaguely know about, and I'm certainly not here to do that to death, because that's not what today's about. But it's also always better to hear these things from the rest of the Essence team and not from me. So we've got a little video about what's been happening over the last year.
The last year has just gone in a flash. I joined Essence in February of this year, and it's been incredible.
The last year at Essence has been really exciting for me in particular, because I've had the opportunity to reinvent myself, which is something that I think Essence does brilliantly for its people.
Here in New York, we've actually grown from about 40 people to 80 people.
We've hired over 120 people. We've acquired businesses in Seattle and San Francisco.
We were acquired by Essence in October of last year, and since then, the addition of international capabilities has been really good for our clients.
We've really had a big focus on kind of cross-office and cross-team collaboration.
Working more strategically across client teams and across disciplines more globally.
Which actually means that we're best in class, not only for one client, but for all of our clients across the agency.
I used to be a client working at a couple of our bigger clients, and so I knew Essence really well already, but coming here on the inside, it's been a whole different experience. We've grown in mobile, we've grown our analytics team, but we're still very similar in terms of culture, so it hasn't changed in that sense. We've just got a, much bigger family.
It's been a great opportunity to be involved with different aspects of the mobile office. Just having my hands in everything has been a lot of fun.
It's the people's passion and their intelligence and the determination that they bring to every day that makes me get out of bed every morning.
So the fact that we have sort of in-house development resources in addition to marketing experts is incredibly unique.
I really just enjoy all of the knowledge sharing that happens at Essence.
And there's great communication between the offices, so you can really collaborate on projects and get perspective from offices all over the world.
So for me, the work that we deliver to the clients, it's not so much about one big inventive thing, it's about bringing innovation into the everyday.
One of the most inventive things I've been involved with is working with an internal tool that we have. So we actually were able to save our client 30% of wasted impressions.
A HTML5 banner. It put the client's content right at the heart of the creative and allowed the audience to really immerse in the content and explore it.
We've done some amazing things with Twitter, working with a brand to connect them to their audience in a way that was never possible before.
The next big thing in digital marketing is definitely how we tap into the emotional intelligence and the emotional side of the people so that we can be even better at the data and the insights and the storytelling.
As digital marketers, we're going to have to think, how do we work around people's lives that are so saturated in a digital world?
Targeting people and tracking people and evaluating our media based on devices rather than cookies.
We are increasingly giving up our data into the online space, and the ability to actually aggregate that, where the real magic will come is how advertisers can use that data in a much more targeted and much more interesting way.
For me, the next big thing is how to enable consumers to choose to watch advertising in a world where they can choose almost everything else about their media.
So I'm interested to see what happens with mobile apps. So we've seen the rise of things like Vine, that's done really well this year, but it'd be interesting to see what happens with things like Snapchat and Line to see how they fit into the social mix and if brands can actually have a presence on those kind of platforms.
With the advent of maybe Google Glass and wearable gadgets, voice search is just going to become more and more essential.
I see Essence in a year from now almost doubling in size again, having developed more leaders of tomorrow and of having helped clients continue to push the boundaries of what's possible in digital.
I don't think the growth is going to slow down. I think that we'll probably have a few more offices around the world.
So it has to be about our clients and the work that we do. If we're still delivering really innovative, insight-led, thoughtful, strategic work and showing the difference that we make through digital to our clients' businesses and taking them to new heights, and if our clients themselves regard us as thought leaders in our field, in digital, then I think we'll be truly category defining, and that's what we want to be.
So that's a brief snapshot of the last year, and of course there's lots of people from Essence here. So for those, the rest of you in the audience, I'm sure there's plenty of people that would love to talk a little bit more about what we've been up to. But without further ado, I want to really bring us on to the main meat of today's program and to our first speaker, Bill Fisher from eMarketer, who is a 15-year veteran of the digital market, primarily as an analyst and a writer, with experience at Gartner and Ovum, and then more recently at eMarketer, which he joined a year ago. Bill.
Thank you, Matt. It really is great to be here. Good afternoon. My name is Bill Fisher. I work at eMarketer. What we do at eMarketer is look at everything that's happening in the world of digital marketing, media, and e-commerce. We're very much sort of data guys. We look at literally thousands of data sources on a daily basis. We curate that information, we vet it, we synthesize it down into what we consider is the essential intelligence that you need to know. So with that in mind, that's hopefully what I'm going to do today. I'm going to look at some of the key trends that we're seeing in the digital space. Some of the guys who are going to follow me are likely going to talk about something slightly more interesting. I'm not going to be able to compete with metaphorical search and racing cars, but I will do my best. And what I'm going to frame my talk on today is this rather cryptic concept of the age of blur. This isn't a bad Britpop pun. Rather, I'm going to look at how digital is leading to boundaries blurring with regards to how we need to speak to consumers. So I'm going to look at how consumer behaviours are blurring, indeed how we define a consumer is blurring as well. I'm going to have a look at what that means for marketers and in terms of how we target them and reach them. And I'm going to look very briefly at the end on the problems that this causes for attribution, which is, you could say, becoming a bit of a blur as well. Before I get into the nitty-gritty, I want to start with a true story, and it begins here in the northwest of England. For those of you that know the area, this is just south of the Lake District, and that brown splodge is an area called the Trough of Bowland. To the south of that, there's a small village, and this is where I grew up. Very small place, 700-800 people max. It's very picturesque, and it's a lovely place to visit, but there's not a lot going on there. Bit of a backwater by all accounts. This is the street where I grew up, incidentally, and that's the view from the end of the street, and this is where my story begins. And it actually begins in 1994. Of course, this image is lifted from Google Street View, likely less than a year old, but I can guarantee you that in 94, it looked exactly the same. And particularly that car park is always empty. There's no reason to go to this village, particularly in the middle of the week. Now, this story begins in the summer of 94. Show my age here, I was at home revising for my A-levels, and this tranquil setting was shattered one day when a fleet of British Gas branded vehicles filtered onto the said car park. This was a major event in the village. There was a lot of curtain twitching going on. A number of sales reps filtered from these vehicles and began knocking on people's doors. One rep knocked on our door. My mum was in, and the guy engaged her in conversation. They were having a nice chat about the weather, about the gossip from the village and so on. Then he got into the business at hand, and he asked her if, sorry, I'm going too far ahead. He's going to fail, you can tell. He asked, does she have central heating? My mum said, yeah, we do. It's actually fueled by a coal boiler that we have in the back there. But he saw an opportunity, and he went on to extol the virtues of gas, the control it would give her and the money savings it would bring. And you've guessed it, at that point she asked him to leave. He failed. I could check to see how vocal an audience we have today. Would anyone like to hazard a guess as to why his sales pitch failed? Anyone? It's a bit left field. I'll give you a hand. She had to inform him that there's no gas supply to the village at all. The nearest entry point onto the grid was 5 miles away, in the nearest town. I told you it was a real backwater, this place I grew up. Explains a lot. 5 minutes later, the car park was restored to its former glory. What I want to illustrate from this story is that 94, we're talking pre-internet, certainly the dawn of the commercial internet as we know it. And back then, the marketing proposition was a relatively simple one. It was certainly more straightforward to predict consumer behaviour and target them accordingly. But even then, things could still go wrong. Today, of course, the equation is far more complicated than that. The consumer is very much a moving target. So let's have a closer look at this pre-internet and post-internet consumer. And this is where we begin to see this idea of blur in action. In terms of how we can reach consumers, apart from the face-to-face example, I'm going to look at media, because that's what we're about. Back then, it was relatively simple, 3 main platforms. I mean, it's not too dissimilar to where we're at today in terms of how we communicate with the consumers. Obviously, the internet underpins things and allows different ways of communication. But in terms of the platforms, it wasn't too dissimilar. However, the media, I should say, the platforms, however, were very limited in number. More importantly, they were married to the media. So I can safely say that in 1994, I was pretty much exclusively consuming video on the TV set, or if I was lucky enough, I got some pocket money and went to the cinema. If we fast forward to where we're at today, obviously, as I mentioned, with the internet underpinning a lot of what's happening, the equation becomes far more complicated. We have a great many more number of platforms that we can reach consumers with, and importantly now, of course, these platforms are not married to the media. I do not exclusively consume video content on the TV set or at the cinema anymore. I use a myriad number of devices. So the equation is getting more complicated, but it's more complicated than that, of course, because we also need to consider how consumers are getting to that content. Again, I don't just sit down in front of a TV screen like I did in '94 and I'm broadcast at. I time shift some of my viewing. I stream some of it. I can even store some of it in the cloud. And with mobility on the scene as well, we also need to consider where the consumer is when they're consuming this content. The upshot is we've got a very much more complicated proposition these days. And subsequently, there are more ways that you can fall over. The consumer's a moving target. And what actually constitutes a consumer is an interesting question as well, because there are some areas of blur here. Pre-internet, the notion of a consumer was very much a singular entity. It was a person or a demographic group. As we saw on the previous slide, there were limited media or platform choices, and they had considerable influence over buying decisions, and of course there's a relatively linear path to purchase. The rise of the web saw that definition essentially split in two, and the way consumers behaved in the online and traditional world was very different. You had to target them accordingly. But if we look at where we're at now, with the amount of device and channel shifting that is going on, this traditional and online consumer, I mean, it's an inseparable entity now. It's almost like we've come full circle, and we need to think again of the consumer as a singular entity. Again, though, of course, with all the added complexities that I spoke about in the previous slide. So this expansion and now the contraction, if you will, again, of what constitutes the consumer is due in part to the erosion of some of these established terms like mobile, established being a relative term, of course. And if you consider, for example, that a lot of mobile content is consumed in the home environment, then what constitutes or what makes a mobile device different from any other computing device, it's difficult to tell. And we have some data to sort of back this up. Now, just a quick note on the data that we chart. It's very complex, very rich, tells a compelling story. Don't strain your eyes trying to read all these numbers. I'm going to help you with the story and pull out the pertinent points. And what we have here is some data from Mobidia and Informa, looking at Android smartphone data traffic and how it's carried, be that over mobile cellular networks or essentially funneled through a fixed network through Wi-Fi, be that private or public. I'm going to take the UK data as an illustration because it tells the most compelling and polarised story, but the trend is not too dissimilar across most of the other countries that were covered. And that story is that a hell of a lot of content, at least on Android smartphone devices, is carried over home or private Wi-Fi networks. Of course, consumers are still very much about mobile, though. And so by the same token, we need to consider how, when we consider how consumers are connecting to the online world, that word online takes on a different meaning than it did at the dawn or the rise of the web. So essentially, well, what I want to do first is look at some data from my old company, Gartner, and as it happens, they've released new data just recently, but we don't need to look at the data in too much detail. Basically, it's just looking at connected device shipments worldwide, and there's a mobile and fixed split, and all we need to take from this is that fixed devices, or those that render as fixed to a location in the home, are very much on a downward trend. Mobile is seeing a huge uptick. Essentially, we need to start thinking of online as a persistent state. It's not a distinct characteristic of a consumer sitting in front of a desktop or a laptop. And accordingly, that term online doesn't really cut it anymore. So we're talking about a taxonomy change, and we talk now about digital consumers at eMarketer. Equally, we also need to consider how traditional and digital platforms are sharing relevance amongst consumers, not just in the way that consumers are using them, but also in terms of the influence that they're having. There's a much greater parity in terms of how consumers are treating these different channels and platforms. So we have some data here from Deloitte. This is a very rich data set. It's looking at the type of ads that have had an influence on internet users on their purchase decisions. Select countries in the US and in Europe. I'm going to take Italy as an example here again because it tells the compelling story, but the trend is similar across the other countries as well. And what we're seeing here is that the top two there, TV and online, were cited by 66 and 70% of respondents respectively. Not a lot in it between the traditional and the digital channels there. Newspaper, traditional, receiving a slightly bigger relevance than social, but there's not too much in it. Online is simply equating to part of this persistent state that I spoke about in the previous slide. And we speak to people across various industries. And earlier this year, we spoke to Tom Bowman, who is the VP of Global Ad Sales at BBC Worldwide. And we were actually talking to him about the disruptive nature of tablets. But he spoke very passionately about some research that they were doing that was showing that consumers are becoming less bothered about the device, and they're seeing the internet as the device. And indeed, this has informed their strategy. It's certainly their iPlayer strategy, and it channeled them down this route of using responsive design. But this state of persistence was very much on Tom's mind as well. And if we look at time spent with media, and with digital media in particular, this helps illustrate this idea of this persistent state. So this is our own data. It's from the US because this sort of data is tracked very well in the US. And it looks at the share of time spent with major media in the US. And essentially what we are seeing here is that digital is getting close to accounting for half of total time spent with all the media, 56% accounting for traditional, of course. And for the first time, digital has surpassed TV in the US, or it will do in 2013, which is what we're predicting. What is also interesting to see is that total time spent is rising year on year. So this is reinforcing this idea that consumers are devouring content digitally, as well as still dealing with traditional content as well. They aren't fussy about how they get that content, they just want it whenever, however. So we've seen how the lines between online and offline have blurred in terms of how consumers are using media, also in terms of what defines a consumer. But what I want to look at now is how similar forces are having an effect in terms of how we advertise to consumers. I'm going to look at branding and direct response. Consumers don't care, of course. An ad is an ad. They don't care about any of this stuff like intent, placement, things like that. But we know, of course, that branding is more important in the offline world. Online, we concentrate more on direct response. So let's take a look at branding. This data from the ANA in the States looks at how US marketers are allocating their budgets, and in the offline space, very much about offline and branding, 60%, but in the digital realm, that drops to 42%. Now, this is actually from quite a small survey base. Illustrates the point well about offline being about branding, but I would suggest that in the digital realm, it's still weighted slightly more heavily in favour of direct response. So let's take a look at another data point here. And this is our own data for digital ad spend in the US. And it breaks out by industry, but I'm more interested in just by the objective. And if we look at the totals at the bottom there, the amount of digital ad spend allocated to direct response, close to 60% in 2013, 40% for branding. But these allocations are set to shift. and this idea of blurring boundaries raises its head again. So we forecast out to 2017 for this information. Here is our forecast. And if we look at where we're at now, so this data from 2012, and we look at the split, we're looking at a pretty much 40-60 split in favour of direct response. But by 2017, we're expecting that split to be much closer to 50-50. And, you know, something that is leading to this blurring is the complication of what we consider a branding versus a direct response effort. So I'm going to look at search, and we have some data here from Mail Online. Now, search is, way back when, was certainly traditionally considered a direct response effort, but given it's the go-to resource for consumers on finding information about pretty much anything, search marketers have been touting its relevance as a branding, of its power as a branding tool, and this data backs that up. So it asked US brand marketers how important certain tactics were for their branding objectives. Video came out top with 26, but search was only 1 percentage behind with 25%. Now, a lot of what I've been talking about alludes to omni-channel efforts, and this concept of omni-channel, we believe, is going to speed up, hasten this breakdown in marketing efforts. So we have some data here from the Winterbury Group and the IAB, and it asked US marketing professionals how much value they placed on omnichannel and what effect it was having on their various marketing objectives. And those objectives were brand marketing, general engagement, and direct response. It was those who attributed a great deal of value to omnichannel on those three different areas was even Stevens. So as you are providing this seamless experience for the seamless consumer, the marketing values, it seems, are seamless as well. So with all this blurring of boundaries going on, how the hell do you accurately attribute the steps that have been taken to a purchase, be that digital or online one? Well, it's difficult. I don't have the silver bullet, but I can give you a picture of the kinds of problems that this age of blur is throwing up and how marketers have been dealing with it or not. This is sort of a no-kidding slide. It tells us something we probably already know, but it's worth saying nonetheless. And Blue Kai asked marketing professionals worldwide if they thought data was important in their segmentation efforts. And no kidding, 91% said that it was. But it's the type of data that's important in this age of blur. Digital platforms can do a good job of tracking and responding to consumers' online activities. But what we need to think about is joining the dots between offline and online. And that isn't easy either. This data from the CMO Council and SAS asked marketers worldwide how well they were getting on with this integration of online and offline, and the vast majority, 97%, said they weren't anywhere near cracking it yet. But a not insubstantial amount, 46%, said that they were getting better at it. A further 3% said that one was more integrated than the other, and another 5% said that the other was more integrated than the other. So we know that it's important, right? Well, maybe we don't, because some of us aren't buying into this all that much. Some data here from eConsultancy and Linchpin, which asked a very simple question. It asked companies worldwide, what sort of data are you analysing? And this idea of analysing the interaction between online and offline came pretty low down the list. And it was pretty static year on year. Now, that's not to say that those other data sets that appear above it are not important, because they are. And there are a couple of people who are going to talk to you after me who are going to talk about social, which we can see the second on the list, and why they are very much important. But that's not the emphasis of this presentation. What I'm emphasising is this idea of blurring boundaries and changing how we need to interact with customers. And this slide pretty much speaks for itself. We are in an age of overlapping activities that are blurring long-standing divisions from advertising to commerce. Marketers have to prepare to be everywhere that consumers are, online or offline, because if they don't, they risk being stuck nowhere. Pretty much like the British gas guys were stuck in the Trough of Bowland trying to sell gas. And by the way, there is still no gas supply to the village. And with that, that's me done. Thank you very much.
So we've got literally a few minutes for any questions, if there are any. There's a few people with mics as well, so sorry, is there a question over there? No? I've got a question.
I thought I got away with it then.
No. So I think actually the attribution is an arena that we, as you know, Bill, are very familiar with, and I know a number of our clients are as well. And I think we all understand the conundrum of how do you actually splice together data that comes from online and offline arenas that's gathered in different ways and has different bases for even thinking about it. Have you seen anything out there in the market from an arena that probably is outside this room where you think actually that there's a nugget of what someone else is doing out in the market that maybe is the silver bullet?
I did say that I wasn't going to give you any answers, and if I did have the answer, I probably wouldn't be stood here. But, I mean, it's really difficult. I mean, what I can say is there are people who are trying things. So I can talk about in the online and offline world and how they're trying to join these dots, and of course sign-in is a way to track this information, but it's something that consumers may push back against because they're not too familiar with this sort of thing at the moment. So something that springs to mind is there was some data out recently. I wrote a newsletter piece about it and I've already forgotten about it, but it was about in-store vouchers being pushed to consumers who go into the store, and whether consumers are going to take them up. Required some kind of sign-in, I think. And the majority of consumers were not too happy about it. They weren't going to take these up, even though they were going to offer them something, money off. They were still suspicious of this tactic. They're a little wary of sharing too much information, too much data. And although we need to speak to these consumers wherever they are, we've got to be careful how we tread, because if we're asking for too much and we aren't targeted with how we use that data, it's going to scare them off, and then they're not going to help us.
Very good. Bill. Thank you very much. Please give Bill a round. Oh, we have another question. Oh. Sorry. Oh.
Thank you. Hello. Andrew Ford from Norton Software Company. A couple of questions around the mobile behaviour. You talked about the Wi-Fi consumption, about 80%. I just wondered if you had any projections or research with 4G coming in. And also, second part of the question, with mobile search being enhanced over time, whether that will change some of the behaviour and consumption patterns.
I can certainly speak. I mean, the reason why I picked out the UK there as telling the most compelling and polarised stories, because to a degree in the UK, we've been a little bit laggard with our 4G rollout. And we're still coming to terms with it. Of course, EE has not had any competition. It's begun to step up its game now that competition is here. You know, there were data limits, and it was, you know, pricing a lot of people out of the market as well. I suspect that we will see a much greater uptake of mobile data being mobile, on the go, taken outside the four walls. No doubt about that. Sorry, the second part of the question was?
Mobile search, just more sophistication around geocoding and location-based search.
I mean, like, I can refer back also to the the study that, or the article that I wrote there based on that study about in-store coupons, what else came out of that study was that the way consumers in-store are using mobile devices is not to receive offers like this, but to look up product details. And we all know about showrooming, right? Doing that sort of thing as well. So, yeah, no doubt that is, well, it's there. It could take off even more, perhaps, yeah.
Okay, we're out of time. Bill, thank you very much indeed. So we're keeping the schedule tight, so I'm going to make my introductions very brief, so I make no apologies for that. Our next speaker has the distinction of being the first ever appointee by the UK government to a role in digital, running the UK government's social media, which actually at the time was the first appointment to a role of that kind anywhere in the world. And she also now, she's involved in a whole number of things within the industry here in the UK, sits on the board of BEMA. Please welcome Tiffany St. James.
Thank you very much. Just put this here. Now, you are all very bright digital people in this room. And I'm going to talk about social media, and you've either been to 100 social media presentations or you've held them and hosted them yourself. So we know that social media has been much maligned and much heralded, from anything from, you know, saying it's an absolute waste of time and a waste of money and unfounded, to some of the discussions at MIP in Cannes last week that social media has been proven to improve your sex life and everything in between. So I wanted to be able to think hard about what I could share with you that might be an interesting story for you, and I'm delighted to have been invited by Shuffle to present with you. I spent, as Matt very nicely introduced me, 14 years locked inside consulting to the central government. So I saw the whole digital evolution, if you like, from no email to open data, and I launched DirectGov, I launched data.gov, and put in some of the first social business and social media practice about audience integration, co-collaboration. Do the same thing with organizations now. So there are many great agencies that will work with clients to be able to produce interesting social media marketing and campaigns. And this is not what this presentation is about at all. The work that I do is to work with very large businesses. Same job I had in Cabinet Office. Where does it sit? Who owns it? How is it measured? Who's got the responsibility? And how can it work for the business embedding capability? And I wanted to be able to share with you some of those stories today in this format in a punchy 20 minutes with 10 minutes Q&A. So that in organizations yourselves, you might be having your own practice, but it might be useful to see what other practice has been embedded, or if you're with agencies and are able to look at how you're managing and serving your clients. So some stories in that regard. So I talk about social really in helping leverage as digital specialists the work that we do in our own business in terms of 5 ways in which social is different than traditional. You might have your own 10 methods, 7 methods, whatever they might be, but for what it's worth, here are mine. So the first of which is that power is in the lobbyist and consumer's hands. So much so that we've seen many cases in this. I guess the work that Greenpeace did in redesigning the BP logo as an open competition in the Horizon oil spill. And unfortunately for BP at the time, having competition with the Twitter stream BP Global PR with 300,000 followers as opposed to BP's own 30,000 followers at the time, tweeting things like, we've eliminated the huge turtle surplus in the Gulf, next on our list, dolphins, whales and reporters, and then a link to the cleanup operation. And you can see the pressure that that puts on organizations. Equally, we saw Greenpeace do the same thing with the fake break, campaigning Nestle for the use of palm oil in their products. If anyone saw the YouTube video, I'm sure many of you have, as a kind of classic case. Sat down at a table, a gentleman has a break and eats a bloodied orangutan finger, and it's quite graphic and horrid and caught attention, is Greenpeace do to put pressure. Now, interestingly, I'm talking with the global head of comms for Nestle. They said it didn't really affect sales, kind of affected share price for a little bit. But more than anything, it did affect how Nestle looked at what they were doing in rainforests in terms of the palm oil collection. So Greenpeace actually did then, affect the policy of Nestle at the time, which is what they set out to do. We've seen, still sometimes called a marketing ploy by Gap. The jury's still out on whether they redesigned the logo in effect to get attention or whether, in fact, the audience and the consumers complained so much about the redesign of the Gap logo that they bounced back to their original one. Is my hair over the mic? Is that better? Thank you, Jess. Jess has been looking after us all. Is that better? Yeah. Thank you so much. And then finally, this is one of my favourites, the residents of Rutland getting together to decide they are so annoyed at the lack of broadband service that they clubbed together, built their own ICT, and this is the box that they have, fibre coming into their own village because they didn't have enough provision. So we've seen this time and time again. So what that means for us as organisations more than anything, and we'll have seen just the last month indeed, the promoted tweet by a disgruntled customer that promoted it to the top of British Airways home strand. So more than anything, we've got for organisations to have a social media crisis plan and what to do when things go wrong. And this brought out a new era of kind of personal lobbying and the first of its kind to hit its headlines. So, power in lobbyists and consumers' hands. The second is the kind of indelible record of messing up in public, and I'm sure we've all got our own favourite examples. Some of mine are, Chrysler Autos, I'm pretty sure, would not wanted this tweeted by their own social media manager on the way home about the motoring industry itself. And American Red Cross held up for it. Now, the difference is that American Red Cross are quite a well-loved brand. So when they have a tweet that's been sent out that was obviously a personal mistake and a personal error, that they tweeted, they deleted it, which is sometimes what we don't advise clients to do, but they deleted it and said, it's okay, we've got the keys and no one's driving. That was obviously a personal tweet missent, which is a nice response, but they're quite a well-loved brand. It wasn't their fault necessarily that Dogfish Head Brewery actually then started promoting getting slizzard as a hashtag to be able to generate more sales. Well, also cleverly donated to the Red Cross. But obviously we've seen this, this personal messing up in public, more prevalently in the UK in the last month when the new Newsnight for editor sent a personal tweet that was on his main Twitter stream about the Labour politician Rachel Reeves that he was interviewing. And you can imagine his kind of personal environment when this comes out. So more than anything, have guidance and train staff and plan for and mitigate these errors and get the right tools in place that help protect these errors coming out. We've known for almost 5 years now that Twitter is the new newswire. We know that, the first incident of a news story breaking was in January 2009 with a forced plane landing on the River Hudson. But it wasn't until February, with the unfortunate demise of Whitney Houston, that we saw a full 27 minutes when a story was broken on Twitter before the main news channels. So we plugged into what people are saying about you and your brands and your industry. I don't know if anyone caught This Is Not an Insight on tumblr.com in Social Media Week. But you might not always like what people will be saying about you, and I'm not even going to read the Twitter screen over there at the moment. But essentially, during Social Media Week, a satirical feed was picking up people's tweets and then overlaying it with their kind of sarcastic comment, and really demonstrating and showing the mirror to the industry in which we work in social media, what they thought of what people were saying that wasn't really insightful. And some of these are a bit too small for you to read, so they might have put things like, when running Facebook ads, regularly check your ads manager to see which ads are working, pause the ones that aren't performing, and they'll write things like inconceivable across the top of it. And it was a live feed going on during Social Media Week. Don't hold back now, tell us something really awesome. And you're really kind of sending up the industry a little bit. And perhaps my favourite that I won't read out on the live stream is, you really ought to be measuring things. So you might not like what people are saying about you. So really, please, let's all add value here. And I hope I am today. The fourth kind of facet is the opportunity in social versus traditional to listen and optimise. This is a map in 2009 about swine flu and where it was broken, and now Google has become more sophisticated. They're starting to look at how they can better predict critical emergencies in countries because people are searching for things or tweeting about things in advance of the first effects of those. There was a case of an earthquake that was tweeted about before it actually hit the residents in the east coast of New York. So this was a swine flu map, and one of the things that we did in central government as far back as 2009 was to openly listen on social media. But because people were concerned about Big Brother and listening, we just kept it open. It was NetVibes feed more than anything else, just looking at what we were listening to. And it was only by listening to social that we discovered that people were concerned, particularly pregnant women were concerned about the antiviral effects on their pregnancy. And we didn't realise that this information wasn't in the public domain. So by the volume of things that we were listening to in that domain, we could change the information instantly on DirectGov and NHS Choices and at the time. So the opportunities to listen and not optimise are to listen with intent. And to listen with intent to be able to act swiftly. What are you listening for, and how can you do something about it as soon as you kind of catch those stories for your business? And then the last one, and I think the most important one for me in the work that we do, is trust in individuals has changed. This is Edelman's Trust Barometer. It's published every year, and it looks at the change and shift of different roles within organisations and how they're trusted. And it's widely accepted, the figures bandied around of sort of 14% trust in advertising, with 90% peer-to-peer recommendation. So this measures in 2013 the most trusted sources, or an academic or an expert, a technical expert in the company, or a person like yourself. And what I think that is key to social is that years ago we talked about sticky content, attracting people back to your home and your space on the web and dwell time. And while that still is absolutely paramount, in social I tend to talk about slippy content. You want to be able to package your information into small digital assets that slide around the social web, but more than anything to get them into those hands of experts who have an authority and an authenticity that talk about your product or service really well to make more of that. So, the 5 reasons of difference in traditional versus social. Unfortunately, I do concur that there are smarter people in the world than social media than me. And one of those is a gentleman called Olivier Blanchard. And he wrote, a couple of years ago now, Social Media ROI. It's one of a kind of great textbooks, if you like, about embedding social media in your business structure. And Olivier talks about 5 uses of social media. And I talk about 6 because I add internal communications to his 5. And I'll run through them very briefly now, but each of the next 6 slides is about people who are working well in this area, I think. So they are HR, PR, direct sales, customer service, business intelligence, and internal communications. So in HR, really, we know that it's larger than recruitment. We're looking at employee engagement. We're talking about reward and recognition for individuals. But essentially in HR, a couple of years ago, Channel 4 started a Twitter stream for everything from internships to events to people management, and they found that they got such a volume of responses and jobs, they started 4 Talent Jobs, holding 1 hour to talk about a particular job or answer questions live on Twitter. And what they did for them is reduce the number of applications, because they got thousands, and there's a cost associated with looking for those applications, and actually the quality went up. So looking at cost savings. In HR is one of the areas in your business you can save money very easily, improve that point to social that gives you the board leverage to roll it out in other parts of your business. Because essentially, you know the cost per hire in your business, and if you can teach your teams to be able to do this very well, there's an associated cost for that channel shift onto being able to help recruit through social channels. I believe today, I think Ernst & Young were in the room. Is there anyone here who's brave enough to put up their hand for Ernst & Young? Because I think, there you go. I widely herald the work that you do in using Facebook as a platform for recruitment, in building a great pool of people to serve the 99% of people that didn't get that particular job, but actually want to be engaged and involved with your brand so well that they'll come back and re-engage. CIA, Apple, they're all using particular Facebook strategies to engage with candidates and pools. So the second is PR, and this is the most difficult area, so I'll be really quick on this because this is the area that wins all of the awards. The marketing, the fuss, the budgets, the whole noise that we talk about in social media more than anything sits in what Olivier calls PR, but essentially PR marketing, brand health, whatever you might want to put in that kind of public-facing camp. So arguably one of the oldest and first examples we've got of social media and PR is the best job in the world with... I'm being asked to move slightly to this way, forgive me for that. Okay. So arguably one of the first cases that we have of using social media, but also then with the effect of working out the cost that it would have cost in other channels and being able to equate that, the job on Queensland. And it's a mechanism that, though used once, is very well used again. So you have the Ford Fiesta launching in the States, and the States have got a car market where they're used to big cars, not perhaps the smaller cars. So they started getting agents. They offered them 6 months worth of free gas and a car, as long as they would upload videos and showcase different things to get people engaged with the Fiesta. How many people can you get in the boot, for example, for a party in your car? So a mechanism that we know well. But PR and marketing are largely the largest area. Direct sales. Now, we know that a couple of years ago, people talked about direct sales on social media and said, oh, it's appalling, don't do it, that's not what social is for. And we know that that shift has changed so much. Arguably, Dell Outlet selling £3 million worth or $3 million worth of reconditioned machinery just from its Twitter feed. The first stateside example we have. Zappos Style doing it really well, 1 in 5 tweets leading you directly to their e-commerce page. But one of my favourites, and just from last month, is Lolly Wally Doodle, a Facebook page, no app, hardly any design, a small boutique garment manufacturer who decided to ask customers if they liked a picture and they wanted to buy it, just to comment on it with their email address and the size they wanted. And they couldn't cope with all of the orders. So put them all in then to a list later and said, this is what we can make today. Click on your name and go to the buying page. It's had now £20 million worth of investment, set to be perhaps one of the first billion-dollar Facebook e-commerce sales success stories, but not using any Apple mechanism, just Facebook's own mechanism itself. We've seen the rise in customer service being used for social, particularly in service industries, really well. And O2 are heralded for their work in this area. So they will, if you're waiting on a telephone to speak to a customer service operative, they will get back to you quicker if you bitch about them on Twitter, okay? But they've empowered and enabled their entire people to respond in the manner that's appropriate and train them well enough to make their own judgment decisions. So I'm not terribly street, so I'm not going to read this out, about someone proposing a question in their own argot and O2 responding in kind in a manner that they didn't think was condescending, but they just had a chat. And it goes on and they have a useful conversation. My bigger favourite in this field is some disgruntled customer being so upset with O2 that they told O2 in a tweet exactly what they'd like to do with their mother. And the kind O2 operative responded back, "We've asked Mum. She says no thanks." We've seen business intelligence really grow up in this area. From the first Gatorade mission control, still a pumping great video on YouTube about a glass box with Google Analytics and live interaction, to November 2010 when Dell set their command and listening center, to Nokia Agora in February 12 on the far left of me. Elegant screens surfacing what customers are saying about Nokia, as well as what Nokia's own product stream and Nokia's own social content. And they use it in many marketing endeavors. But there's the water cooler moment. When I talk about social media war rooms, and the global head of digital, who I don't know from Nokia, got hold of me on Twitter and said, "Tiffany, this is not a war room." And he's right, you know, because it's moved from 2010 from a capability now, not a facility. So you've got these opportunities to look at this information wherever you might be in your business, and to get a temperature check. And this last one nearest me at the bottom is my favourite. This is the Domino's Pizza Super Bowl war room, where 55 operatives were required during Super Bowl Sunday, the biggest sales day of the year, so the tech didn't fall over with the amount of orders coming through. And then the last endeavour, if you like, internal comms, because the way in which that we can connect between ourselves, between our organisations or our stakeholders. So, you know, one of the first original Blue Shirt Nation managers at Best Buy stores, communicating across stores about the issues that are pertinent to them, as well as IBM, largely the social leaders in the field of being able to create a platform where people can communicate internally in closed walls, but then have the opportunity to communicate that and tweet it externally at the same time, and creating a kind of worldwide ambassador program against it. So 6 ways in which social is used in a business. So the last things that I wanted to share with you are, what are the considerations then on embedding social business practice? And I'll just take a few minutes to talk through this and go into questions, just 1 or 2 minutes. So there's things that are arguably informing your social business strategy. When you look at how you even get to a social business strategy, what are the things that you should be considering? Well, crunching really your business objectives and your digital strategy and your current KPIs will give you, you know, what social can deliver for the business itself. So always matched against business objectives. And there's a kind of 4-stage audit process, if you like, looking at your current footprint, what channels you're on, what platforms you are, what success you have, moving through to what works for the competition, your direct competitors, what are they using and what are they doing, and then what's happening in similar industry, and just because of what's happening in that industry, in your industry particularly, what can you learn in best practice from other industry, and kind of crunching that data to understand what is social delivering for your competitors and industry itself. And then the last one really is looking at your people as well as your technology in terms of capability. And if anyone's looked at the 4 stages of skills, growth, sometimes called the 4 stages of competency, if you like, it's a way of just being able to look at people within your business and understand where you are on your journey. The first, and I'm going to get this right out loud if I can, is unconscious incompetence. You are rubbish at something and you're blissfully unaware of it. It's quite a safe place to be because you don't know that you're in that space yet. No one here in this room is there, I'm sure. The next stage is conscious incompetence. You're painfully aware you're rubbish at something, but it's a good place to be, and you're there for a very short space of time because you'll want to move out of that uncomfortable space very early. Conscious competence, you're good at something. It's a learned practice behaviour. You've tried to be able to do this and you've implemented it well. To unconscious competence, the nirvana of you are so well skilled it comes as second nature, or it's a skill that you were born with. And when we look at people in an organisation, you can have all the best strategy and all the best technology and all the best objectives and will in the world, but unless you look at what people that you have in your business delivering that at the moment and where they are on their social media maturity, that's often where a lot of strategy falls down. So with what people and tech and capabilities do you have, you're able to put all that together to be able to get you to form your business social strategies to start with. So this very long, busy grid looks at just 3 stages, not 4, because we don't believe anyone is in unconscious incompetence. Looking at strategy, governance, and then the 6 pillars of social. And then looking at what does, when we're exploring it, look like for customer service, and then what's a more practical way of delivering that, and what's an embedded way. So this is a very simple chart, and it's on Pinterest. If you like it, but essentially looking at mapping your business, because what you're trying to do here is to get people from A to B, not from A to D within this model. In government, we had to underpin everything with some very tough modelling. This is Prochaska and De Clementi's trans-theoretical model of behaviour change, I'll have you know. However, we use this with the Department for Energy and Climate Change, because what you're trying to do is move people up towards an action if you're trying to get a buying process or an adoption or, you know, an awareness. And if people at pre-contemplation stage, they either don't know about your brand or don't care about it or don't like it. So what can you do to move them up? You raise awareness or combat disengagement to get them to contemplate your brand as a potential thing that they might buy or engage with. And provide solutions to get them to prepared really easily and really quickly. facilitate that action. And then once they've bought or once they've become engaged with your brand, product or service, you need to reinforce and maintain that. Look at how you can generate advocacy and peer feedback. So we were trying to use this in the UK government to stop people wasting money and energy by, filling up their kettle so much and, turning off their taps when they clean their teeth and those kind of things. And if you've only got the time or money to do a little bit of that, look at whether you're trying to raise awareness or whether you're trying to get people to buy, and put your time and energy and attention into one of those aspects. Francesca Di Clementi's model, if you will. You need to decide on the right structure for your business. Those bright boys at Altimeter create some great models. They're available on SlideShare about the structure, and we can see largely the hub and spoke and the kind of multiple dandelion that works well in multinational corporations as a good structure for organising social media. A few smart words in governance, really. You can call it guidance, you can call it policy, you can call it whatever you want for your business, but essentially you're looking at a code of conduct, which is no more than a behavioural wish list for how you wish your employees would behave on social. And policy, really. So it's looking at protecting people as well as the brand. Do your people know that they can use social media on personal devices, on professional devices, in and out of hours? And that blend of personal and professional use is one of the most critical things that comes up in social media policy. And guidance. How do we use platforms around here? Most of the press offices that I work with need to look at media mitigation. And there's some things that are the same in traditional media and different in social media. So things that are the same, when something blows up and someone said something awful about you on social media, the ownerships are still the same, and responsibilities are really still key to have. Mainstream media still plays a very vital role, and people want clear, straightforward information. BP were criticised about the fact that they didn't give the right information and had different people saying different things. And in terms of what's different, well, speed to market, we've looked at that in the early social slides we were looking at. Social media is driven by people rather than organisations, and audiences have the tools to investigate, record and publish. A model for you, if you've not come across it, is the American Air Force model. Most digital and social media agencies will base their flow of how to respond to social media on the genesis of this model. And it basically says someone's written something about you online. Is it positive or negative? And it's one of four areas, really. Is it trolls? Is it satirical? Is it wrong? Or is it the result of an unhappy customer experience? And generally, there are four different ways in which you'd handle that response, but categorize it. It's no more than a model for you to adopt, and many of you have your own great ways of doing it. So just two slides for you left now. So what I really believe is I've not focused on analytics at all, and I know Bill was talking a great deal about analytics earlier, which I think is absolutely brilliant, but I could speak all day about that, so I've chosen not to at all within this presentation. But you need to be a pedant for analytics. You absolutely need to look at analytics and measure social within your business. It's a whole other area, but more than anything, you need to love your customers, and the two don't always sit exactly well together. So, you want to surprise and delight your customers. You want them to feel like this. And in the great words of the poet Maya Angelou, people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did. People will never forget how you made them feel. And we want them to feel like this, all of our customers. That is too much from me already, but just under time and ready for a few quick questions. I'm not going to be around, unfortunately, tonight, and I'd love to, so I'm only here for coffee. So please do say hi on any social channel or on Twitter if I can be of help.
Have we got any questions for Tiffany? Stony silence. Do you know what? If we haven't,
decompressing content. There was a lot of content in there for you.
I'm gonna buy us back the time because we are. Sorry. Oh, have you got one, Catherine? Ah.
Hello. Maybe you've seen the report from Baton Hall a few days ago, looking at the FTSE 100. They noted that 20 out of those 100 companies do not have a Twitter account. Do you think, well, most of them are B2B. Do you think they have a point, and what are they missing out if they are not active on social media?
I could spend all afternoon on that one too, but good question. There is a correlation between the FTSE 100 companies that are doing very well and the ones that are experienced on social media. So I didn't see the thing come out on Mashable. I had my head down at another conference for 3 days last week, so I didn't actually catch that. But essentially, I think they're missing out on opportunity. I mean, one of the advice that we always give is if you can do one thing, listen, because whether you're on social media or whether you're not, people are talking about your brand in social spaces, and you very need to be aware of that, even if you're not openly active and engaging in it. So I'm surprised by those figures, and I will investigate further. Thank you. Plenty, I'm sure.
No. Okay, we're going to take a break. Tiffany, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much, guys.
So we're going to buy ourselves an extra 10 minutes for the break as well. So for those of you on live stream, that means 5:40 here in the UK, 12:40 Eastern Standard Time, 9:40 Pacific Standard Time. If you're watching in Singapore, you're a nutter, so go to bed. So we've got just under half an hour. Please be back in here, though, ready at 5:40. Thank you very much. Folks, if you could take your seats. Thank you very much. We're going to get going again. Thank you very much. For those who are on live stream, welcome back. We are going to get straight on with it. No reason to muck around. So, our next speaker has, again, a long career in the digital space. He founded and ran his own digital content agency for a while, and then has had experience in a number of different client organizations. And we've had the pleasure of working with him as our client for the last 12 months. And I think it's fair to say, of course, we're in an industry that moves incredibly fast, but perhaps he's the one person that could say we don't move quite as fast as him. He's working with a brand that is truly global, with an audience in every country in the world. Please welcome Rob Bloom from McLaren.
Thank you, Matt. And first and foremost, thank you to Essence for this opportunity for us to get together as digital marketing professionals to share ideas and insights and trends and data and talk about all the things that we do on a day-to-day basis. But this is how we learn as collectively as digital professionals, by sharing these insights. And that's what I want us to do today. I want to share how McLaren does digital, why McLaren does digital, the challenges that we face in a fast-moving digital climate, as a brand, and the first brand, if you like, that's been up here today, and how we activate all the things that we talked about today in practice. Particularly, I'm going to concentrate on how we become a content publisher as a brand, which is a journey that lots of different brands have been through. We are a Formula One team, so we're a very niche brand, but there are hopefully some principles in this presentation that will help you, let's hope, in everyday digital activity. What I am going to start with is a quick history lesson. And Bruce McLaren founded McLaren on the 2nd of September 1963. So we have just celebrated our 50th anniversary just last month. And Bruce McLaren, as a quiet and reserved guy, as you can see, had some certain values that have continued throughout McLaren's 50 years. Hard work, endeavour, the desire to win. And that really manifested itself in the early days of McLaren as a racing team. Bruce was tragically killed in 1970, testing at Goodwood. And the story is that the following day, you would expect that his workforce, having lost their leader, their manager as a team, would pack up shop, and that would be it for McLaren as a racing team. In fact, they didn't. They came into work the next day. They continued as Bruce would have wanted them to, and they set about getting the car ready for the next race. Found a driver, entered the next race, and won. And that really is the spirit of McLaren that has driven us through 50 years of success and winning history. Winning history started with this man, Mr. Emerson Fittipaldi, which, despite obvious aerodynamic challenges, was our first world champion in 1974. Emerson was followed up by James Hunt, and for those of you that have seen Rush, you'll recognise James as the lead character, if you like, in Rush. For those of you that haven't seen Rush, I don't want to spoil the ending, but I will. James won the World Championship on the very last race of the season in Japan in the pouring rain. Showed that the kind of spirit and endeavour of getting out there and racing in those horrendous conditions, and won the World Championship by just a single point. And he won it from this man, Niki Lauda, who then came to McLaren afterwards and ended up winning the World Championship himself in 1984. The 80s were a dominant era with Alain Prost and, of course, the great Ayrton Senna, who too lost his life in 1994 doing what he loved most. But Senna really did encapsulate the spirit of McLaren and that winning mentality. Into the 90s, the dominance continued with Mika Häkkinen, the flying Finn, and most recently with Lewis Hamilton in 2008, the world champion that grew up at McLaren and came to his success, or his talent came to fruition in 2008 when he won the World Championship on the last lap of the last race of the season. So we are a winning brand. We live to win. It's our motto that winning is enshrined in all aspects of of the company. And this magnificent building, the McLaren Technology Centre in Woking, is a combination of the McLaren Group, which comprises of our road car division, our technologies companies, and of course the Formula One racing team. So how does digital win? How do we apply a winning mentality to what we do in digital? How do we communicate ourselves to the world through digital at that level of achievement that these guys have achieved on track? And first and foremost, in order to address that question, as any digital marketing professional should shoulder the blame or shoulder the question of, is why. Why do we do digital? And it's a question that I get asked very often. Why does McLaren do digital? Do you need to do digital? You are visible to 105 million people every other week in a Formula One racing team on TV. Why do digital? And there are real reasons why. And there's three. It's about activating a true partnership. So the sponsorship model in Formula One has changed, and talk a little bit about that and why digital addresses that challenge for McLaren. Engaging fans and bridging proximity. Another legacy challenge in Formula One is proximity between the fans and the racing teams. How do you bridge that proximity? How do you engage your fan base through digital? And how do you address the bi-weekly touchpoint culture? You know, we race 20 times a season every other week, but how do we keep our fans engaged at those times in between the races? Let me start off with the sponsorship challenge that we face, and it's a legacy issue where traditionally Formula One cars were moving billboards, if you like, empty vessels, lacking equity in the brand that is the racing team, and becoming more associated with these tobacco companies that were sponsoring these racing teams. At the turn of the century, tobacco sponsorship was banned, and therefore all the racing teams, and that's transferable across other sports, snooker, for example, faced a similar challenge. How do you get over that hurdle? How do you disassociate yourself with that to an extent? And how do you start to build equity in the brand itself rather than be this moving billboard? And that's what really the true nature of a partnership looks like in today's environment. That yes, we still give massive brand exposure to our partners on the car every other week to that huge global audience. But there's more to a partnership now than just the simple brand visibility. It's about the 24/7 active engagement between the partner and the team, and being able to help our partners activate campaigns and tell stories in different ways to previously that we've done before. And we live by a motto of you have to give more to receive more. We have to embed equity in the brand that is McLaren in order to be a viable proposition to our existing and prospective partners. And it's a completely different shift about actually how can we use digital to build equity in the brand. Having created an equity in the brand, having recognised through our partners that there are opportunities to tell stories inside and outside of race weekends in different ways through digital channels than previously done before, both ourselves and our partners have come up with some pretty cool stuff. And the first example I wanted to show you was this one, which was a video that recently launched by Mobile One.
There's no one I'd rather come home to. It's always been you. There's no arms I'd rather fall into.
He lost a bit of time on the M1, but it was his best performance of the week.
There's a lot of good things that pass me by, but you're not one of them. There's a lot of times we have to fight, but I know I'll still be here tomorrow, 'cause I love it. I do loving you. I do.
To any of those of you that don't speak Russian, that did talk about the Mobile One Get Personal campaign, which is absolutely a great example of how you get closer to the fans and how you bring the fans into Formula One. So it's not just McLaren creating content, it's working with partners to create this real great content and push it out onto our digital channels. This particular video was activated via the Vodafone McLaren Mercedes YouTube channel, with huge uptake on that YouTube channel and positive sentiment, which is a metric that we do measure by the engagement, the uptake, and the sentiment that it's driving. As well as the why, it's the how, and this is really the core of the presentation and the discussion around how have we, McLaren, built brand equity and become a content publisher as a channel, and how are we doing digital? And first and foremost, it is about the underpinning of being a content publisher. That's the true theme of our digital team. And first and foremost, to achieve that, we've repositioned the .com portfolio, completely relaunched all the different platforms in the last 18 months on digital to create these environments that no matter what sort of content you throw at these channels, whether it be video, imagery, copy, blogs, they are an environment that will consume that content and be able to show it in a great way to fans. We've obviously, with Essence, done lots of work in how we've positioned McLaren as a brand on social media, had a look at our tone of voice, the kind of content that we're sharing, how we engage our fan base, how regularly we engage our fan base, and live by the four key themes of what we're putting out, when we're putting it out, how we're saying it, and the tone of voice. And we're finding that, as lots of brands I assume are, you can take an average piece of content and through the right activation at the right time in the right tone make it very, very cool. And you can take a very cool piece of content and absolutely destroy it by lining it up in the wrong way at the wrong time and on the wrong channels. Search engine marketing for us is again, as you might not expect, given that we are a Formula One team, but actually is very, very important. That why are we creating all of this content and no one can find it in search? And that's not just SEO, that's PPC as well. And paid search has a role to play for us for a number of our different activations. All forms of media, as I've said, it's not just video, and video is incredibly important for us as a racing team, despite the fact that we don't actually have rights to show on-track footage, which presents a challenge for us as a brand, as a racing team. But video, there are so many different opportunities in video, which you've obviously seen one of them playing out. But it's also about copy and imagery. You know, we're not forgetting that a blog actually is a piece of copy, is really good, potentially hugely interesting content to our fans. So we really are making sure that everything that we do in digital is across all forms of media. We are a global company. It's a global sport in Formula One, so we have a very global strategy, which I will talk about in a second. And we've had one presentation, fantastic presentation so far about insights and data, and that really does underpin everything that we do to make sure that any strategic decisions we make about the content that we're putting out, what time we're putting it out, everything should be based on insights, data, and informed decisions. There was also a comment in one of the previous presentations about the team and the people, and I couldn't agree more. I think it's so important that those people within the digital team internally are very wise and experienced and aware of the opportunities in digital and how to activate through digital. So we've created this very agile team internally, which is full of digital professionals, and is set up in a very proactive and reactive way. So there's nothing to say that you can't have that long-term strategy or a content-themed strategy that will take you over a long duration, but you have to be reactive as well. For me, you need to be able to respond and react very, very quickly to opportunities that arise, and push out the content on the right channel at the right time when those things do come up. And being a global company, it's around-the-clock strategy. It can't be a Monday to Friday, 9 till 5. That's not when our fans are consuming the content, and therefore we built our team internally to to accommodate that round-the-clock approach. I talked about an insights-based strategy, and it really is about looking at what works and why it works, and using that information to fuel your next content ideas. A consistent brand journey as well. So from the first touch point of the McLaren brand through to our automotive, through to our Formula One, to create that holistic kind of brand experience, a continual thread is very, very important as well. And to acknowledge that, you know, we're a sports team, and sports teams are very much based on second screen viewing, and the opportunities to engage an on-the-move or a second screen audience requires a responsive platform. So we built a new .com that is obviously responsive across tablet and mobile. So we looked at a lot of new ways of how we can tell stories, and with Jensen Button, one of our two drivers, we've given more from Jensen to the fans. So we've done Q&As exclusive to our digital channels, and we've told the story of Jensen inside and outside of race weekends. In McLaren Live, we have a second screen experience, which is unique to McLaren. And in terms of our historical content, we have Emerson Fittipaldi writing a regular blog for us, no longer with such aggressive sideburns, but they're definitely still there. And we proverbially take our fans and put them behind the wheel of the car and use our digital channels to really tell the story of the car in the ways that we're owning our subject matter. We're trying to build up that insight and really connect the fans with the brand as best as we possibly can. And McLaren Unseen is a video series that we're running to introduce the people behind the brand. So very much about building that brand equity, building warmth into the brand that it's McLaren, and bridging that proximity, that heritage, historical challenge that Formula One teams face in activation. In social, this is a great example of a reactive social strategy. So we do have a social team at races and in the UK supporting. Lewis Hamilton unfortunately popped into the wrong pit bay once he'd signed for Mercedes, and we tweeted instantaneously this: "Feel free to pop in and say hi anytime, Lewis," which, as you can see, went viral straight away. And the kind of content and the kind of tone that we're sharing on social is very much about bringing those fans closer to the brand. It's inside and obviously outside of race weekends. Not afraid to engage user-generated content or tell stories around other aspects of McLaren, i.e. the Rush premiere. In Believe in McLaren, we had a campaign where we believe the first sports team to truly connect the fans and the team through positioning screens such as these in our restaurant and our brand centre in the Formula One paddock, and giving fans the opportunity to tweet directly to the team. So such is the proximity challenge that we face, that there couldn't be a more overt way of saying, fans, team, there you go, and there's a direct connection there between you. Hugely positive, and huge amount of positive sentiment generated around it. We live streamed our car reveal at the start of this year to again open up the brand to the fans. And on Fridays we have a Social Friday, which is an ongoing stream of Q&A between fans and McLaren. Introducing our driver through a Google Plus Hangout, again giving the access to the fans. What I wanted to talk about as well was Tuned. And as a brand, innovation is in our DNA, and we've never been afraid to activate that in the way that we create branded content. And Tuned is an animation series about McLaren in a way that Formula One's never been lined up before.
Our next driver is James Hunt, McLaren's first British champion. Though I'm not always sure his off-track activities gave our country a good name.
Codswallop! The man was a national hero. You see, there was more to James's off-track activities than you ever knew, Professor.
The name's Hunt. James Hunt.
I know who you are, James, and let me warn you, partying, womanizing, and gambling have no place in Monaco.
Nice legs, Prof. Shame about the face.
And they're off and racing, or as they say here in France, something else. I don't speak French.
James, you're needed on a mission.
There's a race going on, dear boy. Can't this wait 57 laps?
I'm afraid not. An evil mastermind has stolen a precious microfilm. Your mission is to track it down.
Okie dokie.
England's depending on you, James. Me? I'm no bothered. I'm Scottish.
Damn it. Hench mechanics.
Peekaboo.
Oh man, I wanna be a spy.
Button. Jensen Button. I like the sound of that. Maybe I'll get lucky tonight.
Looks like your luck's run out.
Looking for this, Mr. Hunt?
Loudfinger.
The film and the race are mine, but at least you will have one last hot lap.
Phew, thought I'd almost lost my helmet. Thanks.
Where on earth is James?
What? This is impossible!
Unbelievable! It looks like Hunt has prematurely ejected.
So that's why James lost the race.
Well, not exactly.
James? James, what the devil are you up to now?
Just doing an after-race debriefing.
Utter nonsense. James Hunt was not a secret agent.
Then why has this car got an ejector seat?
No idea, but let's give it a whirl.
You will have to watch the rest of that episode on Vodafone McLaren Mercedes YouTube channel. But again, what a great example of branded content and really telling the story and building that affinity in the brand and that affection in the brand that is McLaren in a completely different way. It is on YouTube, it's doing very well for us on YouTube, and again, it's driving hugely positive sentiment around the brand. I'll just quickly mention the global targeting. We have a Spanish presence on social and .com, and they're continuing to evolve the amount of local language or global targeting that we're doing. And my final slide is very much about, okay, all of these things are great, but what's it done for us in terms of how we measure it in metrics? 100% increase in the amount of followers on social media in the last 12 months alone. So we're growing hugely well on all social channels. And as you can see by the Facebook growth chart, it's based on an organic growth, but you do get these spikes which are generated by campaigns. The responsive activity that we've done has led to a 40% increase in mobile or tablet devices of our .com views. The sentiment is positive on social, and there have been multiple occasions of increased buzz and McLaren obviously trending on Twitter. And really, what does all that do? Well, it enables increased reach for our partners and McLaren to have a brand that we can be proud of, and that we can do justice to that incredible history of winning mentality from Bruce McLaren to throughout all the champions to today, and how we tell that story on digital.
Have we got any questions for Rob? Okay, can you just wait for the mic, Alex?
That was great, thank you. I was just wondering, it's fascinating, the model which is about basically keeping sponsors really happy and gaining more money from sponsors. What are your headline objectives that you measure against as a business? So we've heard a lot today about, socials only to measure against business objectives. Do you have specific targets to hit with sponsors or merchandising targets? I'd be really interested to know those and how these feed into those, or whether it's a movable feast at the moment and you'll work those out as you go along.
No, I think the metrics that we measure by are the age-old metrics of reach, engagement and sentiment. So we do look at the content that we're putting out and how many people are seeing that, and how many people are engaging with that content. But sentiment is obviously massively important to us, and all of these things now with the tools that are open to us can be measured, and measuring sentiment on the social channels in particular is very, very important to us. There are indirect and direct ways of monetizing what we do. Merchandise, as you picked out, is one way, and of course that has a huge role to play in digital. So yeah, hopefully that gives you some insight.
Have we got any other questions? Over here. Is that turned on?
Just a quick one referring to the tuned YouTube channel. Is it a way to try to tap into the female market?
Wow. Toon does tap into new demographics for sure. I picked out an episode to show you there that was possibly a little bit crude in places, so it may not be the best episode that I can show you, but it actually does target a younger demographic and a female demographic, and we feel that's really important to ensure that we don't just appeal to the hardcore fans, that we do branch out and in digital target a whole wealth of Formula One fans, of which a good percentage are females. Perhaps next time I will bring a slightly different episode with me.
We've got time for one more question over here. Hold on. Is the mic's not on. Hold on a sec. Okay, should be on now.
Yeah, it's working now. Okay, thanks. I'll start again. Thank you. I would like to ask you about, you spoke about Twitter, and you talked about the 9 to 5 thing, the 24/7, because you're going all around the world. So do you have translations? Do you use, Sky, satellites? So it's really busy service, and that's obviously increasing. So is that a quicker way, really, to get to people? And how do you set that sort of stuff up?
So in terms of races, and there's an in-race and outside race strategy, and we make sure that we tell the story of races in the best way that we possibly can. And therefore, activating content through social at a race is done at a race, where we're obviously targeting the local time. There is also a UK team based in Woking to help target the UK hours. So it's about at-race activation, in the UK activation, and also setting up the hours of the workforce to ensure that you have provisions to be quite agile in the way that you work. There isn't a rigid 9 till 5 structure, if you like. There is an understanding of flexibility. So sometimes weekend working is obviously required. Sometimes evening working is required. But then you set your workforce up accordingly. There are obviously tools that will enable you to post automatically or automated at certain times. But as we saw with the tweet that I showed, that sometimes you need that person on the end of the phone or the laptop to write out that tweet and post it from the venue itself.
Rob, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. So obviously you know who the next speaker is. I'm sure you did anyway. To finish us off, so to speak, we have J. Paul Neely from Usarian Lives. And J. Paul started his career at Unilever working in consumer products, and then moved into a world of service design, but more recently has done what he describes as working with emerging technology to design future products and services. Please welcome J. Paul.
Great, thank you.
So yeah, I'm gonna share with you some ideas today about metaphorical search, and I'll mention a little bit just in terms of background, kind of where some of this work and the idea space came from. So as Matt mentioned, I've been working a lot with emerging technologies, in particular in a space called speculative design. It's also sometimes called design fiction or critical design. And it essentially is designers decoupling design from the demands of the near-term marketplace and then using it as a way to explore future products and services. And not being predictive and what that future will look like, but rather using them to ask questions about technology. So what are the future implications, the social, cultural, and ethical implications of these technologies as a way to kind of start conversations? And so I came to the UK about 4 years ago and was studying in a design interactions course at the Royal College of Art. And it's a course dedicated to this sort of exploration, to speculative design. And we were, with one of my co-founders, Daniel Foster Smith, we're asking a lot of questions about the health and resilience of complex systems, some interesting kind of theoretical conversations. But one of them that we kind of hit on quite often was the dangers of singular ways of thinking about certain spaces and the value of diversity for the health of a system. That kind of led us to this particular space and this particular project with Yossarian Libs. So I'm going to do a bit of mind reading now. And when I ask each of you to think of internet search, just conjure up an image in your mind of what internet search is. I'm seeing smiles. And is there anyone in the room that did not think of this? Actually, honestly, is there anyone that did not think of this? Okay, a single Bing user that's maybe afraid to raise their hand. But this is what we think about when we think internet search, and it's a singular way of exploring the web. And it's incredibly valuable for certain types of queries and certain types of activities. But it's not the only way to explore the vastness of the internet. And actually, it also has some problems. And the particular problem that we're interested in is that it tells us what the world already knows. So if you think about the last time you used Google, for example, before you can even finish typing in your query, it's already returning the results of what everyone else has searched for. Right? We've heard these called junk food algorithms by Eli Parser and others. People are concerned about the world that they feed us. Instead of helping us kind of expand or grow in our understanding of a topic, they actually reinforce existing knowledge and collapse possibilities. And this is particularly problematic for certain types of, say, creative endeavors. If you're in the business of generating new ideas, this is a bit of a disaster. Because the more you use it, actually, the more you're like everyone else, the less creative you are in a way. And so we became very interested. We don't actually want you to know what everyone else knows. We want you to generate new knowledge. And is it possible to use a search engine to kind of support that activity? So if you imagine kind of today's internet, this web of ideas and concepts, and current search will take your query and then return results that are closely related to it. And we take a different approach with our engine. So we understand your query, we understand the structural attributes and components of that concept, and then we look to return ideas from entirely different domains that share similar attributes. So what we're really interested in is this lateral connection between ideas, or a metaphorical connection between concepts. Often when we say metaphor, people's faces just glaze over. They're kind of having these flashbacks to their secondary school English teacher trying to explain the concept. But this is an audience that knows metaphor well, and we use it in so many of our communications. But as a quick refresher, take for example the statement, "Love is a river." Well, love is not a river, right? That's patently false. But when we understand it metaphorically, you have this flash of insight. Right? Okay, well, love ebbs and flows. It's ever-changing. It has a source. It's difficult to control. We were sharing this with a venture capitalist here in London. He turned to his partner and he said, "It's cold and dark." The metaphor sometimes, the interpretation sometimes tells us a lot about the individual. But in that instant, right, the attributes of river help us to think about love in a particular way. And these metaphors are incredibly powerful in that way. So a concrete example, and this comes from my background in healthcare service design. So I would often be asked to reimagine the emergency department of the future. And the more time, we do that search in Google or an existing search engine, and it returns what we already know about emergency departments as they exist today. And everything I learn about them actually makes me less valuable to the physician team that's asking me to help or support. And in this instance, this is where metaphor can actually be really, really powerful. So that same query in Yossarian Lives returns a metaphor, and in this case, a Formula One pit crew. I've already apologized to Rob. We'll have a McLaren photo in there for future presentations. Do you see the metaphor? So the broken patient is now the broken car, and we have a multidisciplinary team working to fix a problem. There's a sense of urgency. And all of the technologies, the processes, the roles of the Formula One pit crew help us to think about the emergency department in a new way. And actually, there are a number of hospitals here in London that have implemented processes from Formula One pit crews into their transfer patients and in other parts of the hospital, and seen reduction in different types of error in the course of doing that. And actually, just last week, the metaphor kind of continues to be persuasive and pervasive in healthcare. Atul Gawande, Dr. Gawande, one of the kind of leading thinkers in US healthcare, was suggesting that the role of the physician is moving from kind of cowboy to pit crew. So instead of this kind of lone ranger physician type, we now have this multidisciplinary team of nurses and other experts working on the patient. But so a whole shift in thinking in the industry from looking at another space. So who uses these? Well, almost any industry you look at, you can find great thinkers that have kind of utilized metaphor in their work, and they're everywhere as you begin to really understand what's going on in the space. And I'll just mention, one of our favorites down in the corner, James Dyson. And he's actually quite clear. You can kind of connect the metaphors in his work. For example, cyclone technology. So understanding the mechanics of this natural phenomenon, then translated into a physical product. And then even, the metaphor works so well, we continue to use that in the communication. So we call it cyclone technology. Or the Dyson ball, another example. Can a Hoover move through your home like a football on a pitch? But look at almost kind of any great thinker, and you'll see these metaphors play out in their work. A few kind of quotes on the power from Parkhurst: any supreme insight is metaphor. Aristotle suggested that the greatest thing by far is to be a master of metaphor. Quite a statement from one of the greatest thinkers. And finally, one of our favorites: the most profound social creativity consists in the invention and imposition of new radical metaphors. And you'll often find industries that are completely revolutionized by the imposition of a new metaphor, or you'll see industries that are suffering under old, kind of unworkable metaphors that continue to define the thinking in the particular space. So we're actually finding that anyone that derives value from new ideas, exploring metaphor in this way becomes quite interesting. So let me give you a few kind of more concrete examples. So let's say that we've been asked to search language, or that's a particular topic that we're exploring. A Google search of images will return something like this. So you can see things that we'd consider language, and again, it's a literal return. This is what we'd expect. The same search in Yossarian Lives, again returning a metaphor. So in this case, we've got kind of this string of images through the middle. Is language a structure, or is it a bridge or a network? And you begin to start thinking about language in a particular way. Is the Eiffel Tower a type of novel, if language, or the novel of language, that sort of thing. Another example, I'll share a few of these, and hopefully they'll kind of come along, but search. Again, Google, kind of a singular perspective on what search is. But there are other ways to think about search, and this might be an interesting metaphor. So is search about hitting a target, or aiming, or pointing a gun, finding a target? Interestingly, there's no right metaphor, right? There are potentially hundreds or thousands of possible metaphorical targets, and so what we essentially kind of gather those metaphors and then allow the user to begin exploring those different ideas. Another example, science. Again, from Google. And again, we've got kind of this singular perspective. And if you imagine, if you're an art director, this isn't particularly helpful material, right? It's kind of cliche. It's what we already know. And you think about even some of the communication happening in science today, the efforts to get girls involved in science. And if the belief that science is only chemistry and physics and old men that kind of look like Albert Einstein, it's a very narrow view of what actually science is. So metaphors for science is science about a puzzle or a crossword or a maze, figuring something out. Another is science actually about the inner workings of something, or figuring out the insides, or how something functions. And we get quite excited actually when the project begins to suggest new metaphors or things that were maybe possibly novel. So, is science actually a seat of power, or an institution, or a type of governance? So each of those becomes quite interesting. And finally, on meaning. So I think with Google, for some reason, we get a lot of comics about the meaning of life. But again, reflections of meaning from Yossarian Lives, is there maybe something about balance? So again, I'm showing you kind of snippets, but there are potentially a lot of different metaphors to begin exploring. One of the things that's interesting, we've found that images work really well because they demand that the individual first interpret the image to identify the metaphor. And what that does is it forces someone to kind of begin thinking through their own experience and what they kind of know of the world. And we find it allows for much kind of higher hit rate or insight rate as users are exploring with this. So it kind of becomes a brainstorming or a dialogue tool with the user generating new insights. One of the really interesting things about metaphor is that your ability to understand a metaphor varies based on your own experience. And we've come to call this the Stephen Fry problem. And so for those of you not familiar with Stephen Fry or some of our guests across the Atlantic, Stephen Fry is a very well-known presenter and actor, intellectual, and he's kind of celebrated for his encyclopedic knowledge of everything. And the joke kind of goes, if we're all at a dinner party with Stephen, and you make a joke about some obscure 17th century philosopher, Stephen will laugh, and he'll crack up, and then he'll add some anecdote about the gentleman's mother. And the rest of us will just kind of nod, and smile. And it's not that the connection wasn't dead on or very clever. It's just that we didn't have enough information or knowledge about the subject domains to make those connections. So it becomes one of the challenges in the work we're doing is to identify the right metaphors to return to the user. So for example, we can return one metaphor to one individual, and the person just dismisses it, it's meaningless. And the same metaphor to another person actually has them almost in tears, it's overwhelming. I can't believe how creative this system is. So that individual variation becomes really interesting. The other kind of space that we've been exploring or working in is that of conceptual metaphor. And there are a lot of thinkers now that suggest that metaphor is actually how we process the world, that we actually think in metaphor. And I'll give you just a couple of examples. So when I say, for example, that I've had a rough day, if we look at your brain in a functional MRI scanner, as I share that phrase, the parts of your brain that handle actually tactile, sensorial information are firing. You're literally feeling roughness as I talk about that day. And we know, linguistically, I meant that kind of literally. or it sounds literal. We don't think about that as a metaphor, but we actually physically respond to that type of phrase, which is amazing when you think about the resonance now that you can have with individuals as you communicate with metaphors. It works the reverse way as well. So, for example, if someone's holding a warm cup of coffee while they're talking to someone else, a stranger, and then asked about how the interaction went, they're more likely to refer to them as a very warm or nice person than if they're holding a cold cup of a drink of some kind. So again, the physicality of our space begins to change the way that we think. There's kind of some amazing overlapping. So I'll give you one more example of this, and kind of one of our favorites. So if I, for example, say to you, crime is a virus, and then I ask you about what we should do about crime, people tend to say, well, it's an ill our society faces. It's all about prevention. It's about finding a cure. It's looking for these kind of social interventions that we can fix things. If I tell you that crime is a beast, and then I ask you what we should do about crime, people start talking about, it's a battle. It's something we really have to tame. We need more police. We need more prisons, and it's a fight. But then if you ask people about this afterwards, they're completely unaware that the single word metaphor actually played any role in their kind of problem solving or thinking through of that issue. And so these metaphors, we know this as, and you'll know this as marketers, are really, really powerful. But the ability for single word metaphors to frame cognition in that way is incredibly powerful. And so it's actually, we're realizing there's some opportunities with some of the technology that we've developed to begin exploring this. So I'll give you one example. We trained the early system on a British corpus. So it was reading a lot of Jane Austen and great British literature. And I got a call from Dan late one night, and he's like, we've done it. We've done it. And he had searched for heaven, and it had returned cup of tea. And it's like, this is the answer. And again, you share that with any Brit, and there's an immediate smile. They literally feel what heaven is like. They know that sensation of a nice cup of tea. But to an American, I'm sorry, it just doesn't quite do the trick. But actually, that's one of the big opportunities, is there are social and cultural variations in understandings of a particular metaphor. And so we're realizing there's a big opportunity to begin parsing different language sets, different readerships, and begin to understand what metaphors are at play with different audiences, allowing you to kind of connect with them in unique ways. So we're quite excited about that. So one of the interesting discussions we've had quite a bit is with a lot of creatives in this space, and several times we've had these moments where they kind of go ghost white as they realize some of the implications of what we're looking at, and they say, well, this is human creativity. This is the one thing that I do that the computer's not supposed to be able to do, and you're now doing that thing. And but we don't like to think about it in that way. We generally talk about it as augmented creativity. So the individual's ability to generate these sort of lateral connections, again, is based on their own experience. And in a way that the algorithm has just seen more of the world. So it's able to bring up potential connections or lateral connections or metaphors that the individual hasn't thought of. There's still a huge amount of work, though, in the selection of the appropriate metaphor. There's a lot of nuance with the content on say, the messaging side, and also the context of the audience side to be considered. But we do see an opportunity to do more than just serendipity in our attempts at ideas, but to actually use these types of technologies to augment creativity in this way. So that's hopefully a few ideas and maybe some insight on this particular project. And I guess if there are takeaways, my hope is that it just kind of to refresh thinking about metaphor, and as metaphor plays out and works in your different communications and the spaces that you're working in to kind of understand that, and also to suggest that there's a lot of new science kind of happening around metaphor and new technologies to begin allowing us to explore this in different ways. And I think it quite an exciting space then for metaphor moving forward. So hopefully that inspires some potential interest or applications or insight in your own practices that might be interesting. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe Paul. Have we got any questions? Alex over here. You wait for the mic again.
Hi. Part of my life is as one of those cold-hearted investory types. So I'm fascinated. I think it's an amazing thing. How have you thought about how you asked the question at the end? How could you use it? I'm wondering how you see yourself, how this lives and breathes in society, and how people will use it, and how you'll, I guess, ultimately make money from it.
Yeah. Well, we're excited. We think there are a lot of different types of applications for the technology. We've kind of started in a tool for working in creative spaces, and we've started there because we've realized, art directors, creatives, marketers, generally, they're really good at metaphor. They kind of get it. They use it on a daily basis. They know the value of it. And so the thought is if we can create a tool that's actually valuable for that set, then that becomes really interesting to be able to explore other places. But it's actually been interesting. I mean, as we've talked to people, we're surprised every time at kind of how diverse the potential applications are. So we'll talk to a teacher, and she goes, well, I'm always trying to come up with metaphors to explain, the complex scientific idea to my class of 8th graders. You talk to the journalist, and he says, well, I do that on a daily basis to capture in the headline the topic at play. So I think there are a lot of potential applications in that space. The big one for us, I think the most interesting, again, is the social and cultural. When you can begin to kind of understand the conceptual underpinnings of different ideas within a cultural group, we think that type of information becomes really interesting to a lot of different groups. So yeah, it's early days, but we think there are some neat opportunities. Cheers.
Got one here, Sally. Oh.
It's always terrible when you have a question, but you can't actually formulate it properly, and I am about to do this, but
you might need a metaphor for that.
That's exactly my problem. I think it's a fabulous concept.
Cheers.
Even though I can't express it, and I, by the way, as I'm thinking, love that comment, potentially disruptive.
Yeah.
If you look at brain science, is it not true? There are probably experts in brain science in this room, but is it not true that we remember things by forging links between different elements of a longer thought? At least that's what I understand. It's like people have visual memories, can remember somebody's name by association with a bird or a visual item.
Right.
What strikes me about this is you're plumbing the depths of brain chemistry by making these associations between things which we describe with words and things which we can clarify with imagery. So the question, which is still not well formulated, is have you discovered anything about brain linkage, the way that we remember things through the study of metaphorical search?
Yeah, our group hasn't in particular, but I'll just mention our third co-founder is Dr. Katya Shetova. She's a PhD from Cambridge in computational linguistics and natural language processing. And she's currently working with the Lakoff group at Berkeley. He wrote the book Metaphors We Think We Live By. Anyway, kind of the father of a lot of this conceptual metaphor. And they're now doing a lot of work where they're trying to see those connections, where you're studying linguistic metaphor, how we speak, and trying to understand exactly how the brain is processing those ideas. So I think it's just early days in the science, but they're huge opportunities to kind of understand exactly what you're suggesting and how those pieces of those systems work. So yeah, it's getting exciting, I think.
Got time for one more question.
Thank you very much. Very, very interesting. Benjamin Fass from Google. I find it quite extraordinary to imagine. No, it's quite extraordinary to imagine inventing a search engine that really returns more questions than answers. How does it work?
Yeah.
You don't have to answer that question.
Yeah. Should maybe touch base after. No, but I will say we give Google a hard time. Again, it's a fabulous tool for finding answers to questions that we know. And you're exactly right. This is, in a sense, a question generator. It's often said of Metaphor that it half invents and half discovers the associations. So there's some existing associations, but then it's also it's creating new associations that don't yet exist. So it's a very different type of query, but we like to frame it in that way. I guess in terms of how it works. Generally, it's how you create ideas in your own mind. So we're creating similar associations, understanding attributes about particular concepts, and then seeing how those relate to other things. That's the kind of nice over-the-pulpit answer. But but we're happy to talk more and discuss some of those nuance.
I think this might be the moment where I have to admit we might have forgotten to tell Jay Paul that there are quite a few people from Google in the room. And, yeah,
we love Google, just so you know. We really do.
And with that, I think we ought to close. Jay Paul,
okay,
thank
wonderful.
you very much indeed.
Thank you.
So I don't really have much in the way of closing notes, actually. So, other than ripping apart the lectern. But just a few words very briefly. Thank you once, those of you that are attending, for not just for your first time, thanks once again for coming. Those of you it's your first time, I hope you've really enjoyed it. And those on your live stream, thank you so much for joining us. We do love your feedback. And particularly those of you in the room, I really encourage you, if you haven't been on the web app, if you go there right now on the welcome screen, it's got a button that actually goes to a feedback form. One of the things I guarantee you is if you walk out of this room and grab a beer, I know you won't fill it in. So I would really love it if you would do it now. I really would. We'd really, really appreciate it. And we do, as you heard earlier on, we've made some changes to the format this year based on the format from last year. So we really do take it on board. I'm always told I shouldn't do this because people say, well, it takes up too much time, but it goes without saying events like this don't happen with a huge amount of effort from some people, and I would like to thank a number of them, which I will do as swiftly as I can. Many of them here in the room or actually doing stuff right now. So in our social team, Daniel, Ed and Sinead, the video crew, Leif and Ryan, our tech support team, represented by Rob here today, our creative team for all the work on websites, web apps, and a whole heap more. On registrations today, we had Nikita, Ella and Sally, and last but not least, our amazing marketing team, Nikki, Catherine, Cal Peter, and the person that really has been the linchpin of the whole thing, Jess. Jess, thank you very much. And that is it from us. Thank you very much. Hope to see you again next year. Take care.